Our joy that has no end. I want you to think about that phrase. Our joy that has no end. I want you to think about that in reference to the message that we have for the world and the message that God has for each one of us. Joy that has no end. First of all, I want you to think about joy. Think about the best joy you ever had. It ended, didn't it? I remember when I was young, and there were certain things that I looked forward to, and they would come, and I was not able to enjoy them because I knew they were going to have an end. There'd be a special evening at a concert or something like that, and I'd say, oh, and then I'd go, and I'd say, but this is going to be over in a couple hours. And I allowed that to spoil the good times that I had. Joy that has no end. We're not accustomed to things that have no end. We don't know how to think very well about that. As a math teacher, I always found it interesting to try to teach students about things that have no end. An infinite series. 1 plus a half, plus a quarter, plus an eighth, plus a 16th, plus a 32nd. That's a series that has no end. But it's so difficult for us to understand that mathematicians wrestled with that for thousands of years and still really don't have a definitive understanding of it that persuades all other mathematicians. Bertrand Russell wrote some things about the infinite which pose questions that other mathematicians still can't really answer with the degree of rigor, very important mathematical word, rigor, that other mathematicians require. Now Zeno, the ancient Greek, for him it was easy. He says that series goes on forever, which means that if someone fires an arrow at me, I can stand still and I don't need to worry about it hitting me. Because first it has to come half the distance to me. Then it has to come half the remaining distance. Then it has to come half the remaining distance. And then it has to come half the remaining distance. And it has an infinite number of steps to take, so I can just stand here calm. There is no record of Zeno's dying from the experiment because he had a practical side also. But joy that has no end. Now those series we can say, well, the mathematicians come to some understanding of it because although you keep adding terms, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. But not with the joys that Jesus has for you. They don't get smaller and smaller and smaller day after day. In Ephesians chapter 2, one of the great verses is in the middle of that marvelous chapter, and it's just a little phrase thrown in there that God's desire for the infinite time ahead is to keep showing us how much more there is that he knows how to give us in the way of pleasure. He wants to show us that the joy will have no end. He wants to fill our hearts with a comprehension of something that is very, very difficult for us to get a hold of. The enemy does good work on this. He says, who wants to sit up in heaven playing harps forever? How dull that's going to be. Well, that's not what heaven's going to be like. That's not what Ellie is experiencing this morning. Hallelujah is right. New bodies. You all have new bodies. Yeah. You know what was going to have an end? Pain is going to have an end. Dis-ease is going to have an end. Weakness is going to have an end. Uncertainty is going to have an end. Friction is going to have an end. Personal friction. I don't know about physical friction. I'm not sure what God's going to do about that. He rides chariots on the clouds, so he doesn't need the traction that an automobile needs on the highway. But anything unpleasant that you can think of is going to have an end. Sorrow, going to have an end. Disappointment, no more of that. No sighing. No saying, oh well. None of that. Joys will have no end. Joys will have no end. Jesus rose from the dead. Not today, not this morning, not last week, but almost 2,000 years ago. As a victor, as a winner. The world is a place where there's a battleground between good and evil, between loss and gain, between darkness and light, between sorrow and joy that has no end, between weakness and death and life eternal. And God is on one side and not on the other. And on the other side is the enemy. And the enemy never did anything good for anyone. Forget about Gounod's Faust, or Goethe's Faust, or whoever's Faust you want to think about. Forget about it. Satan never did anything good for anybody. Jesus said he is like the thief who comes only to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And he said, I am come that you might have life, and you might have it. Then comes a Greek word which is translated abundantly. It means just overflowing, bubbling on out like a gusher. No end. Now this isn't a very deep, difficult, philosophical concept, is it? You all understand what I'm saying. This is not a lecture hall where I'm trying to give you partial differential equations and how they work. That's difficult. I've done it, but it's difficult. This is easy. You all have God's revelation in your hands. And you all see the promises. My God will supply all